Okay, welcome to the business panel on worldwide aid and development assistance. Before I'm going to introduce to you the panel participants, I think we have a short introduction by Kakal. And it's not Jaffa Flohr today, so I learned this just a few minutes ago. Johannes Guanin is going to represent the Kakal.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, obviously, I'm not Jaffa Flohr. My name is Johannes Guanin. I'm the Chief Emissary of KKL Israel, of Keren Chemical Israel, Jewish National Fund of Israel to Berlin. And dear Ambassador Victor Harel, Mr. Shai Babat, Mr. Arnon Perlman, and Mr. Eikelmann, thank you very much, first of all, for welcoming me here, dear guests and friends. Well, this year, the State of Israel celebrated its 70th Independence Day. It's therefore truly fitting that as we celebrate the birth of our country, we are also here to discuss the role of Israel's economy in world development assistance and its impacts on the lives of people worldwide. Sharing our knowledge, our experiences and successes with partners of various countries means sharing our benefits in an equal and just manner. This is crucial in our efforts to build a better, a more prosperous planet that can support the needs of the present and future generations and fosters a peaceful understanding of nations. KKL-JNF has been working with many countries across the world to share Israel's know-how in agriculture, forestry, food security in the face of climate change. KKL-JNF also works to share its expertise in combating desertification, integrated pest control, and afforestation, watershed management with many countries. For many years, Israel Bond is a major partner of the work of KKL. We are very happy about that, and we are looking forward to many more years of fruitful cooperation. We recognize that the challenges we face cannot be addressed by any single country. Only knowledge sharing and cooperation will pave the path towards a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about a very interesting aspect today of international cooperation on disaster relief, worldwide aid and development assistance. I think that's very interesting. Let me introduce the panel to you very briefly. I think the most asked for, the busiest panelist, so to speak, today is Shai Babad. He's a managing director with the Ministry of Finance. Welcome to the panel. Next to him is Arnon Perlman. I think he's very new in his position. I can understand that. He held numerous positions. I think it's far too short to introduce everything, but now he's holding the position of Head of International Operations with Israel Bonds. Welcome. And last not least, we have Victor Harel, ambassador, used to be ambassador to numerous positions, including Spain, Belgium, Luxembourg, and several others. So thank you for being here. Shai, let me start with you. Before we enter, so to speak, the international level, what interests me is in August, I believe, the Ministry of Finance announced a major investment in the north of Israel as sort of a development strategy together with the Jewish National Fund. Can you talk us through this as sort of an introduction on what development means within the State of Israel?
Basically, Israel is considered to be, there's two types of Israel. There's Tel Aviv, which everybody knows and comes to visit, the business city and the business center of Israel, and then the rest of Israel, which is the peripheral area. And our job as government is to make sure that we some kind of build a bridge from Tel Aviv to the other cities, that the gap between Tel Aviv and the other cities is not to that extent. And what we have been doing is we decided there's three major regions in which the government should influence. One is the center of Israel, which is Tel Aviv, which is basically doing it by its own. And the other one is the north, and the third one is the south. What we've done in the south is that we pushed the south very, very hard by transferring a lot of the military units from the center of Israel into the south, mainly the technological units, and we've made Beersheba, which is the capital of the south of Israel, the city for cyber. It's considered today to be the Silicon Valley of cyber in the world. There are more investments that are done in Beersheba as a single city than any other city in the world. And as was mentioned before, the figures are around 20% of global investment in cyber are done today in Israel. And a lot of them, if not most of them, are done in the south. So one, we have opened up the region of the south to kind of a technological cyber area. Then we said, well, now we also need to look at the north of Israel, because the gaps between the center and the north are not sustainable for a long time, and not everybody can live in Tel Aviv, and we don't want people living in the north and driving every day to Tel Aviv to work in Tel Aviv. We have to make and create viable jobs within the north and within the south. So what we've done in the north, we decided that all our technological industry and to push our customary industry to being more technological will be done in the north of Israel. And we've put a lot of funds in how to promote industry, how to make the industry more technological. And I'm talking about customary old industry of factories, of plants, dealing with any kind of material and any kind of machinery. That was the first stage of the plan. The second stage of the plan is how to bring leisure and health and wealth care as well. And to all of that, and it's quite a big plan. And only talking about that can take about 15 minutes. But generally, what we wanted to do is to make sure that people living in the north can have decent job, paying decent salaries on high-level qualitative jobs, can have leisure time which they can accumulate and consume in a way that is close to what the offers are and the variety is in Tel Aviv, and they'll have a decent welfare and health care program. That means decent hospital, decent healthcare programs, and with all that, the government has structured a 15 billion shekel plan, and of course infrastructure. That's a very transportation infrastructure that is also very, very important, because even living in the north, you need to connect the northern cities to one another, and to make sure that those cities can connect and can commute in a decent time. So taking into consideration transportation and infrastructure, healthcare, welfare, and creation of jobs, and moving up and giving incentives to companies and to the industry to develop within the north, that was part of what we've done in order to push the north. There's still a lot of work to be done, because let's say the GDP per capita in the center towards the north is quite in a gap. Also the average salary in the north compared to the center is quite in a gap. And mainly, and the one that disturbs me personally the most, is that the expenditure per student till he reaches the age of 18 in the north is approximately less than half to what they get in the center of Israel. And if we want to change and to close the gap between the north and the center, the only way to do it is by pushing education and making sure that the same opportunities that a kid in Tel Aviv has will be the same opportunity that a kid in Ramat HaGolan or in Chatzor HaGlilit or in Rosh Pina or in Nahariya, any one of the northern cities that I just mentioned now, will have as well. So this is basically, like, on a very, very high level, 50,000 feet, what we are trying to do. And still, it's very, very difficult, because it's very, very easy for youngsters just to come and say, well, you know what, forget about the north. I want to live in Tel Aviv, I want to stay in Tel Aviv. And this is a problem that we are feeling, because a lot of the youngsters are leaving the original cities in the north and coming to live in Tel Aviv. Then they get married and they get out of it.
So they move to Berlin. No, I'm going.
No, Berlin, but
my mistake. I'm sorry. Yes.
Not that many, but
yeah. And by the way, you only move to Berlin for the same reasons you moved to Tel Aviv. You still want to party. Yeah. Once you have a family, you have little kids, I'm not sure Berlin is the answer for you, but probably you're moving to the suburbs.
Well, I'm living in neither, so I'm not the expert for that. Okay, thank you. Arnon, let me bring you this over to the international level. Obviously, we just learned that when it comes to development, Israel has still a lot of work on its own, in its own country. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, when we talk about disaster relief, international aid and so on, we have the big players, so to speak, like China, the United States, or even Germany, that are involved in this. So what can a small country like Israel add to the picture? Is there something specific, an Israeli touch, if you like, to this?
First of all, when you speak about international aid, it's not necessarily in times of trouble. It's generally international aid. It's a diplomatic tool. It's a financial, economical tool. It's a political tool. It's part of the general strategy. And it's also something which comes from the Jewish heart, because the Jewish have suffered a lot throughout the ages, and it's a way of giving back. Now, Israel was lucky enough, also with the funds that were invested in Israel, as the chairman Israel said before, via the bonds, was lucky enough to develop its infrastructure, to develop its brain. And when it comes to giving back, we're not competing with Germany or with China, with America, with the big giants, but we have our unique touch, which is exactly that, the human brains, which is the things who are developed in Israel and can be exported to help other nations. If you take the small things, if you ask anybody in China, everybody will tell you Israel is Eisenberg. Now, Eisenberg is the one who brought agriculture to China. And he has done it both as a private entrepreneur, but also in a way to support and help the Chinese people. We are doing it in Africa. We're doing it in many places. It's part of the strategy. It's a diplomatic tool, because when you build relationship, even with country that you don't have a diplomatic relationship today, you can build it via this tool. It's a financial tool, because then it can become a market to Israeli entrepreneurs, to Israeli companies in the later stages, if the company develop. It's a political tool. If you speak about the UN, if you speak about things that you need to support, sometimes it helps. And it's part of the strategy. But I think, as I said a minute ago, it's also part of who we are as Jewish people. We have undergone so many things in our history that if we have the option to give back, and the word is to give back, I think we're doing it, and we're doing it full-heartedly, because it's part of who we are.
Would you like to add on this, Ambassador?
Yeah, sure. I will continue on the same lines as my former colleague Arnon, and saying, the concept of giving. We can have a wonderful example which we use sometimes in Israel. Those who know, I think in this room everybody knows Israel. We have two major lakes. Some of them we call them sea, the Kinneret, the lake of the Kinneret in the north, and the Dead Sea. Now, we want to be like the lake of Kinneret, which is green, which is flourishing. Why? Because the Jordan rivers get into the lake and goes to the Dead Sea. We don't want to be the Dead Sea. In other words, what Arnon was saying is correct in that sense, that not we receive and we want to contribute. Now, that's part of it. Then, of course, that's more the ideological issue. The economic issue was mentioned. The diplomatic tool, for sure. Every diplomat has its diplomatic tool, and we need it, as we need the cultural issues, as we need all the rest. The technical assistance is very, very important, and exactly in this month of November, we are celebrating in Israel 60 years of technical cooperation and assistance, which was created by Golda Meir with David Ben-Gurion 60 years ago. And by now, more than 300,000 trainees have gone through our projects, which is a huge, huge number. And we have hundreds of technical assistants around 140 countries, some of them without diplomatic relations with Israel. So you ask, well, without diplomatic relations or without relations at all, why do you help? And I think, in Hebrew we have a phrase that says, Aniyei ircha kodmim. The poor in your country come first. So why do you use some of your resources in order to help other countries? And I said the ideology is there. But there is another aspect to it, which is political, of course, and I say it's connected, for instance, today with the BDS. The BDS comes to us against us in order to put in question our legitimacy as a country legitimate among the nation. So what our answer is, no, we are part of the family of the nations. We do contribute to those needed, and our assistance is very, very special. And therefore, I think one of the best answers today to the BDS is really our international cooperation. I must say, as you know, I belong to the Israel Bonds organization, and I sometimes try to say that we have our answer to the BDS. Our BDS is bonds develop security. So that's what the way we try to make face to that. But basically what I'm saying is we are legitimate, and we are probably the only country today which legitimacy is contested after 70 years of independent life.
I want to give you another example, which is a remote example, because everybody thinks about international aid and international help in a big ways. There's a small country I think most of you haven't heard of. It's called Palau. It's a 17,000 people country in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. However, it has a finger in the UN, and it is a country of its own. It's not a diet, by the way. It's a country. It doesn't have water. And what we gave them, and it lacks also doctors. So Israel sends every year a delegation of doctors to Palau to treat all the citizens of the people of the island who are in need. And Israel just sent a desalination machine, about $400,000. That's about it, which was sponsored partially by the private market, not for anything but to help. And this is a tool to create, to maintain relationship, to show friendship, and to get, in the end, if something is needed, also the diplomatic, political world help in return.
So you mentioned just one example. Can we get from the big picture to the small picture? Because before we talk about the specific technical aspects, I would like to address, are there specific areas where we focus on development policy? Is there an Africa strategy, or so to speak, or are we focusing on Southeast Asia or whatever? Are there specific areas that are interesting?
I think about strategy, Victor can tell you better than anybody, but I think that if you speak about specific issues, whenever there's a need, there's a, God forbid, an earthquake here, a flood there, or anything, we're there. This is tactical help if needed. We're actually the first one to offer help whenever there's a natural disaster strikes wherever in the world, including places where we don't have relationship with, because that's who we are. But there is, under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is a strategy.
Absolutely. I mean, following Arnon, there are three major principles in the Israeli technical assistance. It's needed. I mean, when there is either a major catastrophe, needed for the first. Second, wanted. Do they want our assistance? We usually also offer when in countries in the area there is a need for assistance, but we are probably maybe not wanted. So that's the second principle. The third one is within our possibilities. We know what our possibilities are. Usually, the Ministry of Finance knows better than us what our possibilities are. We would like to have more, but that's a fact. Now, as far as you're concerned, yes, definitely. Africa is a major, I would say, in our priorities of technical assistance is a major priority. And not by chance, we have also what's called a tripartite agreement. In other words, we do technical assistance with another donor country. Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden. There are the three major European donor countries with whom we have special technical agreements. Now, with Germany, it started about in 2014, and we are doing two major projects in Africa, one in Ethiopia and the other one in the Lake Victoria in Kenya. The one in Kenya, in Lake Victoria, which is trying to change the environmental atmosphere there and help those about 2,000 or 3,000 farmers in the area, is a very successful one. And the German government just now, in the meeting there, they had about months ago when Merkel, Chancellor Merkel was in Israel, they signed a new agreement to enlarge this assistance. So what I'm saying is Africa, because being the most poor region in the area, biological independence. We do have projects also in Asia with the more poorest countries, and then Latin America also. But I would say that altogether, we are back in Africa by now.
Okay, so we've established where the focus is. Let us talk through some technical details of examples. What obviously, when we talk about Israeli aid, it cannot be quantity, it has to be quality. That's obviously a given. Is that a lesson that we can also derive from the development of Israeli economy itself? I mean, if you're talking about connecting the north to the wealth, to the prosperity, to the startup of Tel Aviv, is that an example we can also adapt when we talk about development policy?
Yes and no, because when we look about where is the aid and the assistance we can give to the developing world, we are trying to look at what's missing there. And for instance, the two basic needs of undeveloped countries is usually the shortage of water and food. And this is the basic elements in which every country needs in order to survive. And when it comes to that, and we look in Israel, we see that, well, Israel has also shortage of water. And due to its great agriculture technologies and agriculture development over the years, it doesn't have shortage of food. And what we have done is we've taken all the technologies we have developed in water desalination and creating water resources and also agriculture technologies, and we decided, well, let's see how we share those with countries of need. And then we went to many countries in Africa. And first it started as an aid and assistance to those countries, but it's also a lot of political gain to it and policy gain to it, because usually when I travel around the world, we always get the same story about Israel, the Palestinian story and the security story. And this is all the time a thing that is always there. And a lot of the people around the world, when we go and visit many countries, don't know any other Israel. What they know about Israel is the conflict with the Palestinians and the security situation down in Israel. Some are more towards Israel, most are against Israel because of it, and the BDS is just a phenomenon that came out of that story. What Israel is trying to say and to do, and the government of Israel, is to say, well, there's the Palestinian issue, and there's a lot of debate about it, and you can try to pick your sides with it, and it's fine, but there's a whole other stories to the state of Israel which aren't being told, and the contribution of Israel to the world, regardless of the Palestinian story. And the contribution comes, on the one hand, on the technological side, and the share that we have done, whether it comes to take, for instance, the first chat program, ICQ, was developed in Israel, one of the first chat programs ever. And then look at what's Mobileye doing today, and later on we have an event of how to help people who have high difficulties to see. Are very kvedei, how do you say that? Heavily sighted. Visually impaired. Okay, thank you for that. And the technologies that today are being developed by an Israeli guy of how to solve that. And if you look at what was done in Israel in the field of cyber, that has helped and protected so many countries around the world. We share the knowledge and share the technologies that we have with most of the Western countries in the world to avoid and to assist countries not to being attacked, whether it's on the financial sector details and information, or whether it's general information which every private individual wouldn't want to be open on the net. And the contribution there on those fields of Israel to the society of the world is enormous. And it's a story that is not being told. And so that's on the high end. And on the low end, when you look at countries like in Africa, and poverty, shortage of water, shortage of food, also there, the technologies and the experience that Israel has encountered itself are being now distributed all over the world. And I think that, this is a lot of part of the story that has been told. And my colleagues here also talked about what do you do in disasters. A case of earthquakes, case of natural disasters. Israel sends delegation because it's very, very high medical level and the experience and the knowledge that our units and our fields units have possessed over the years. We actually use that to the benefit of all. And it doesn't matter which country. It can be Turkey, although there are now disputes with Turkey, and it can be any other country, whether it supports Israel or doesn't support Israel. Our policy is that whatever we can contribute to the world society will be there and will contribute. And that's a whole other story than the story that is only being told on the conflict with the Palestinians. And I think the more that we'll get the story out, and the more that the world will acknowledge the contribution of Israel and of the Jewish people to the world, to the society of the world, then the less will need to be always defensive and justifying the situation down in Israel, which is very, very complex, and there's no right or wrong solution there.
And Shai is right. And these are the big things. It starts with a doctor that goes somewhere to treat kids. It starts with a after army teacher that goes in a group and teaches kids in Africa or in Southeast Asia. It starts in the very small things and goes all the way to the big things. And it's a combination. Israel helps the world, period, in whatever it tries to do. But it's also, in the end of the day, it's also good for Israel. I would say, take Vietnam, for example. Vietnam, which is today, all the Israeli entrepreneurs are running there because it's a fertile place to do business. It was, and it still is in some sections, a very, very needed country. And Israel supplied Vietnam with a lot of programs to help when it comes to doctors and medicine and water and whatever we can do. So it's always a combination. It's also something which is in benefit of Israel, which when Israel looks into the future, those needed countries of today, in Africa, Southeast Asia, whatever, might be in the future a fruitful platform to do business.
So let's do this practically, just to have a general picture of this. If you say that Israel is helping Vietnam with sort of development,
yes.
but I mean Israel, that's 9 million people. Obviously, we need to identify.
Not
the
each
players.
one of them gives a shekel.
Well, I mean,
It's
it might be start.
It's
It
not a
might
bad
be start.
idea,
But practically, I mean, is there a combination of what the state of Israel is providing, what NGOs are providing, what private companies are providing? Is there a network? Is there something that is basically everyone's trying to do something? Is this connected with each other?
Well, it really depends on the case and what is the aid with. If it's a natural disaster, then probably it will be governmental public service or military forces that will go there with medical forces and with NGOs together and will take care of it. But when you talk about, agriculture, then a lot of it will be done by the private sector and companies within the private sector, and also water desalination. A lot of it will be done by the private sector. And definitely when it comes to technological, cyber and other technologies which are being shared, it's done by the private sector. And some of it, there's a lot of intelligence sharing between us and a lot of the Western countries regarding, let's say, anti-terror activity that is being shared of knowledge that Israel has, and that is done on the public sector level. Of course, government and intelligence institutes who talk to one another. So the willingness of Israel to share its experience, its knowledge, its capabilities with the international community is endless. I mean, our policy is that we are here to help and we are here to assist in anything that we can do and anything that we assist, and we feel our share as a country in the world society, and we're part of this big group, and we should contribute our share to it. And I think this notion is not always brought into the table the way it should, and the contribution through that notion is not always there. I think if you look in Israel, we have been boycotted by so many Arab countries. But if we look at the contribution to the world of those Arab countries, to the international community compared to Israel, Israel has contributed more than all of those Arab countries together. And yet, the world opinion is that Israel is not doing what it should do. And I think that it's very, very important that we find the way to differentiate the stories. And to say, well, there's not only one story about Israel. There are many, many stories about Israel. And if you want to talk about Israel, then you should talk about all the stories. We're not saying the Palestinian story is not a story that should be told or heard, and anybody can have his own opinion on it. But there are many other stories that should be on the table, should be discussed, should be shown, and should be criticized, whether positively or negatively, in the same way. And unfortunately, I can tell you from someone who travels as a representative of the Israeli government many, many times, it's definitely not the case. I mean, everything is being reduced, minimized and reduced because of the other story.
Yeah.
I would like to add two aspects. One, I completely agree, because, for instance, if you take the Ebola problem in Africa. We were one of the first countries to be there and to help on the health, because our doctors were there, our know-how was there, and we didn't get enough credit, that's for sure. And then in Haiti, the poorest country you have in Central America, Haiti, they were suffering terrible during the earthquake, and so we were there. We were not only there, we stayed there. Our doctors stayed there. They created trauma units there. We created what we call today hospitals of hope in Africa. We have several hospitals of hope managed by Israeli doctors who really transfer their technologies and their knowledge to the local doctors, and doing what are. And then we come up with the, with the usual accusations of Israel being apartheid, racist, and so on, instead of getting the credit we are for. Now, you ask also about, is there a special something about us? I do believe that an Israeli expert, in general, has the Israeli mentality of having a lot of initiative, without being exactly prepared and following, a special program and agenda like experts from the big countries, like Americans, for instance, who work in a massive way. We are more individuals. Our individuality is excellent in order to solve very specific problems that you have in the third world countries, and therefore our assistance is looked and seeked absolutely, because we can find on the spot and without any major framework or constructive, do the right thing. So that's also one aspect that we should take into consideration.
I can also tell you that this is from personal experience, that throughout the years I was approached, and people who I worked with approached as private business people to assist, again, each one in his own, with his own capabilities and fields, to assist countries. And I know of many Israeli businessmen that have assisted, some with technology and some with finance, and not a lot of them did it in order to get famous or get to build a name for themselves, because it is something which is done. Now, we need to differentiate very, very specifically between times of crisis, when we come to help, an ongoing project when we come to educate. Educate not in a way, we're not exporting democracy. Educate means if there's a country in need, then we're able to build or to draw from our own experiences, Shai was saying, to help them build infrastructure or stability, or when it comes to water and food and agriculture and desalination and solar power, everything that we're good at. That is a long-term thinking. The private sector is more involved there. The Israeli private sector is more involved there. When it comes to crisis, it's government plus NGO versus government in the other side. So this is you have to differentiate between two things. This is where we are at.
But we could call this sort of an Israeli specialty, that so many different areas are involved in this, like the private sector, like NGOs, and all intertwined into a sort of network. Is that the Israeli way?
I think when something happens, Israel is there. When there is it doesn't just emerge. When there's a country in need, it just doesn't. It's not somebody standing in a city square in Israel and shouts as a country in need. It happens for a reason. It either happens because of government to government, or it happens because of personal connection. But when it arises, when the need arises, there is a joint effort, government, NGO, private sector, that can assist.
I must say, that's where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs comes into being. We have a special unit there, a special department called Mashab in Hebrew. It's our international agency, which its main task is to coordinate the actions when, as Arnon said, when the need of emergency is concerned. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs will call the right NGO who can help on the spot on that specific area and coordinate the efforts in order to have a front and coordinated activity vis-à-vis the country in question.
Okay. Before we open to your questions, I have one more because we've essentially established the sales pitch. That's just the upside. That's the good thing. That's the idealistic thing. So let's talk one last thing about problems. What is the most pressing challenge when it comes to Israeli foreign policy in sort of development? No problems. Everything's fine.
Was always fine.
Why are we
is
doing
always
this?
fine, will be always
Why
fine.
are we
I forgot
doing
to
this?
say that.
Okay. No, so what is the challenge when you talk about, especially when you talk about the strategy of foreign policy?
I think you should ask the Minister of Finance.
I
So
was
money
waiting
is the
for
problem.
this to happen.
Is there money problem?
I have to be honest with Shai. I was asking him when Victor was speaking. I don't remember, and I'm sorry, Victor, because ever that Israel wanted to assist some other country, and the Minister of Finance said no. Ever. If it's an issue of assistance, it's a big
Especially
difference.
in the last 4 years since Shai is there.
Okay.
We
Wow,
watched.
okay, so
we
I
watched.
think
We
this
watched
is going the wrong way, people.
Yeah, we watched the Jerry Maguire movie and we showed them the money. This is what we try to do. But basically, when we talk about obstacles, there are of course always budgetary obstacles because you need to think of how big is the assistance of the aid is going to be, and if the government is being involved. It's a blanket, so if you push the blanket from one side, then the other side stays uncovered. So it depends on the amount of funds that you need to allocate to any specific area in which you want to aid. But I think that's compared to the obstacles that we have, that's the smallest one. The larger obstacle is that there's a lot of countries who wouldn't let Israel assist them because of the story that we talked before. And I think this is a major situation. And it happens more than once or more than twice where there were disasters happening in countries where either now there's a tension in the relationship or there's no relationship at all, and those countries wouldn't let Israel send a delegation. Where Israel called them up, told them, listen, put the conflict aside right now. We want to send it. It happened with Turkey not long ago, and with the earthquake, and it's time after time when it comes to those places when we can give assistance. We don't think whether there's a political tension right now, there's no relations. We know we can assist. We know there's human beings on the other side. We know we might be able to save them. This is what we think, and we say let's do it. And the major obstacle is not. In some cases, we are not being allowed, or we don't get the permission or welcome to give the assistance or the aid. So I think this is basically one of the major problems. The other problem, which I think is a side effect to it, is if you look at the international bodies, such as the UN and its subsidiaries, they themselves are not always welcoming or looking forward to see Israel's helping, whether it's for political gain or political agenda, which we are disturbing it, or whether it's for other reason, it's not understood. But I think the major obstacles that we have today is, I would say, the political situation and the foreign affair relationships. This is what prevents Israel from helping in any crisis, because I can tell you the policy of the Prime Minister and the government itself is that doesn't matter which country it is, what disaster it is, who is behind it, if we can help, and if we have the knowledge and the capabilities, and we can send the team over, we'll do it, if the other country will say yes to it. And I think this has been the policy for many years, and this will remain the policy. And I think the major obstacle for that is just the relationship or the attitude towards Israel from those other countries.
Allow me to add one more small problem is knowing when to stop. It's also a problem. At a certain point, the countries might not need our assistance. And allowing or pulling back is also an issue of a smart strategic planning. When help stops and you need to let the baby grow by itself. So knowing when to stop is also an issue which is always part of a strategy. Again, we're not speaking now about a crisis, an earthquake. This is obvious. This is a cut-clear case, an ad hoc problem. But when you're going into the long run, knowing when to give the tools or the keys, I would say, to the ones you were teaching is also an issue when sometimes is missed. And if you overstay your welcome, I would call it, then all the positive which you have gained so far might quite quickly become a little bit negative.
One other problem I would mention is the instability of certain countries where we work. And if we talk about Africa, I mentioned before that Israel and Germany were working together in Kenya, in Lake Victoria. We tried to work in Ethiopia too, because Ethiopia is a very important country for us. And the area that was picked is an area which is a high security risk for our people, for the area, and so on. And then you have instability in some of the governments, which one specific government may want the aid, our assistance. Then there is a coup, there is no democracy, they change the government, and we are not our services are not required anymore. So that's also part of the daily life of our international assistance.
And if we're speaking about the Israeli bonds, I think our chairman, our president mentioned it before. Israel was fortunate enough to enjoy throughout the years, since Ben-Gurion times, the investment of the world Jewry via the Israeli bonds to support the Israeli economy. Just a couple of days ago, there was an article about what the Africans are learning from Israel and from Israel bonds is to raise sovereign debt of their own, much like the Israeli bonds is doing, and to market it to diaspora, African diaspora outside of Africa, in order exactly that to raise funds to develop infrastructure. So I think we have neglected the knowledge transfer that we do so much, and this is just another example of knowledge transfer that comes from Israel.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Is there something you'd like to ask?
A question on the... Sorry.
I think he was... Or would you ladies first? Okay, here we go.
Well, ladies first, yes. Sure. You need the microphone.
I can speak.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I have just a question on numbers. I mean, can you give some numbers in terms of GDP, how much you spent in Israel?
On general, wow. That would be very hard because you'll need to accumulate the figures from the private sector and the NGOs and the government. The government figures are quite small, I mean, relatively to what we spend out of GDP. But I think that overall, the assistance is quite good. It can get to several percentages.
And that's where, Shai, comes the tripartite agreements we have, because Germany is investing together with Israel on a third country. The Dutch are doing the same. Swedish Agency of Development is doing the same, and therefore the budget is very difficult to measure, because you don't put the third party, the donor party, into the whole pot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned NGOs before, so KKL, Perlman Israel, is an NGO, though we serve as a forest service of the State of Israel. We are observer organization at two UN agencies, at the UNCCD, the Combating Desertification, and UNFCCC on the Framework Convention on Climate Change. We luckily do not get, or do not need the money of the Ministry of Finance.
It's the opposite way around. Yes. It's the other way around.
We do not want to talk because we do not like that. But we also, as NGO, have our international cooperation. We focus on Africa for several reasons. First of all, we want to improve food security. We believe that planting forests will improve the ecosystems, and 1 billion people are threatened worldwide by desertification. Their livelihood is threatened to disappear. So we want to stop desertification. We want to plant trees in Africa. We luckily learn in Israel how to do that. Israel is a very small country. It serves as a laboratory, and we export the knowledge we have to other countries. We signed a contract with the state of Kenya, the Minister of Environmental Affairs of Kenya, and we work on several spots where we try to help people on the spot to stay where they are, to have a good life, and by that means also to reduce migration. That when it's not only Israel and other countries in the Middle East, but also Europe, Europe's security and well-being. So that's what I want to add, and I hope that we as NGO and you as representatives of the ministries will have a fruitful cooperation also in the future years.
Great, thank you. We have one more question.
Yeah, that's maybe a bit off topic, but I know that only the Israel bonds raised 1.8 billion dollars.
1.2.
1.2 billion dollars, I think, to 2017 or 2008. And I think you have many donations made to the state of Israel in particular, but to the state in general as well. And I also know that life in Israel can be quite expensive for people. Is it possible, in the light of so many donations and investments into the state of Israel, to just lower taxes? Is that
Thank you. He doesn't know that we paid you money before, so it's okay.
I mean, I explain why I'm asking. I mean, it may be stupid.
Okay, that has triggered early elections in the past. I'm not sure if we... No, okay.
And if you can name anything, to how low you want to take it. Do you know what we're talking about?
No, yeah, I don't know what I know it's kind of a stupid question, but don't you think that it would maybe would have an effect on some social tensions you have to deal with, and social tensions always have something to do with inner security. So that is why I'm asking.
Right.
Try for a short answer, please.
Yeah,
I know that. It's, yes.
Your question has taken me to several fields. One, the social insecurity, the inequality gap, taxation policy in Israel, the fiscal rules, and the raising of the debt of Israel through bonds and through donations. I'll try to do it as fast as I can, but I'll give a quick financial lesson.
You have another speech at 5.
Okay, so I'll take the next 120 seconds and I'll do a very, very short lesson that will try to answer your question. First of all, the figures that we're getting as donations, or whether we raise from the Israeli bonds, are negligent and irrelevant compared to the Israeli budget. The budget of the country today stands around 400 billion shekels, which is approximately 125 billion dollars a year. The raising of the money, since it's not a donation, it's a loan of 1.2 billion dollars, is something that we pay back. It's irrelevant to the end of the day, to the deficit and to our ability to reduce taxes. The donations today that we get are even less and really negligible compared to what comes to the budget. At the end of the day, like most countries in the world, the expenditure in Israel is higher than all the revenues that come out of taxes. That means that we have a deficit. Our deficit is quite low, and we've managed to reduce debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio, and everybody's going to fall asleep in about 20 seconds from now, but the debt to GDP ratio is basically what every country measures itself, its financial stability, its financial strength. When you reduce your debt, that means that your country is in a very good economic situation, and you reduce your debt, and debt is always a percentage of your global GDP, because what you do is, if the country grows and GDP is higher, that means you can contain a higher debt. So as long as we reduce that ratio, we're in a good pace. But still, that means that because GDP is growing and you have still a deficit, your expenditure are higher than your revenues, and you need to find the balance of what deficit can you allow that you'll still be able to reduce debt to GDP ratio. And as long as debt to GDP ratio is not going down drastically and your deficit is still a little bit high, there's no way you can reduce taxes. Now, when you talk about, and this is why this money is just irrelevant to the fact that you can reduce taxes, although in good years when revenues are up, like we had in 2015, 2016, 2017, what Minister Kahlon, my minister, did, and our ministry, is we did reduce taxes. And what we did reduce taxes in order to reduce the social tension that you talked about, is we reduced the taxes for the lower deciles. So what we did is we didn't do a general scheme of tax reduction. What we've done is we went to the lower deciles and we said, where can we make it easy for them? So for instance, we took negative taxation, which is earned in tax credit, and we enlarged it for people who have very low salaries. And we did some other steps, and Israel has already given me the eyeball, so I'll shorten my answer. We did a lot of steps in order to take those low deciles and reduce the taxes for them. But rather than that, The taxation policy and reducing tax will never come out of donation, will never come out of grants or raising money through the bonds. The main reason, and with that I conclude, the main reason today Israel need the bonds, and this is very important for everybody in this room, and I'll probably repeat it in the room when we'll go to in 5 o'clock, but the main reason we need the bond is not because of the money. Israel is a very strong economy. Israel is a very, very, very stable economy today, and the amounts being raised by the bonds are not the ones that, you know, economically makes a difference. Where it does make a huge importance and it does make a huge difference is the connection that we have through the bonds to all the individual and to the spread of individual and the connection, whether it's Jews or non-Jews, that are actually being connected to Israel. And through the bonds, they get to hear all the other story that we talked about here today and get to know a little bit more about Israel. And the fact that they are willing to commit to Israel and take and actually issue Israel a loan and make a commitment to Israel, that is more valuable to us than any amount of money that we can raise today outside Israel. And that connection of so many individuals is what makes the difference, and the story against the BDS, and the story about Israel being taken out by all those individuals around the world. And this is why it's important that the bonds will have an embassy everywhere in Europe and not just in the States, and by the way, everywhere in the world. So we will be able to touch those individuals and to tell our story the way we also want to tell it, and see if people can connect to it or not by the individual level. Okay. And the fact that we have so many individuals, that's what makes a difference.
You just began with your speech. So the short answer is no on lower taxes.
There's no...
I have... Well, no. We're really running out of time. So I would like to have a very short answer to the last question. When we talk about development cooperation, is that something that could be promising in the future with German-Israeli relations? Is that a yes, no, could be improved? Is that good? Is that...
I'll give a very short one to this. Definitely yes. When it comes to vocational training and professionals training, which is not academics, such as you have the Meister here. Mm-hmm. This is something that Israel can learn a lot from Germany, and cooperation here is definitely needed. 50% of our graduates, of people who go to our school, don't graduate in Israel. And those 50% needs to find a different path to find themselves into employment. And vocational training and professional training is something very, very important, which we are still lacking. And I think that here the cooperation with Germany can take us many steps forward.
Very sure. I will add.
Arnon said yes. Okay, that's good.
No, I also mentioned the fact that in the last meeting of the two governments, the issue of the technical assistance between the two countries was mentioned towards third countries, and it definitely was the atmosphere. Let's increase it, because there is a potential for further strengthening the relations between the two countries. Definitely so.
I will take one more minute, and I will speak about what I see as the future of aid in general, because the future of aid in general. Chinese billionaire bought the rights to build an Israeli university in China. It's a financial project, but we export Israel into other places in different means. So now there's going to be a Technion, called Technion, under the management of Technion, with Technion professors and lecturers in China. This is also a way of helping. It's part under the private sector, but it's also Israel exporting its knowledge and help around the world.
All right, thank you very much to the three panelists. Victor, thank you.
Thank you. You did a very good job.